sleepaway camp every year since I was six.
Under the blinding spotlight, Sarah Silverman stands alone on stage. Her timing is perfect. Every punchline lands like a confession dressed as a joke. The audience roars with laughter, but behind her half-smile, there's something fragile. A flicker of melancholy that only she can feel. For most comedians, humor is a craft. For Sarah, it's survival. She's not just trying to make people laugh. She's trying to keep herself from falling apart. From the outside, she was the queen of dark comedy, the fearless provocateur who joked about the unthinkable. But behind the controversy was a woman battling depression, heartbreak, and an endless search for meaning. How does someone so broken make the world laugh? And how did laughter become her rebellion, her weapon, her therapy, and her curse? This is the story of Sarah Silverman, the woman who turned pain into punchlines, defied every expectation, and proved that comedy isn't just about laughter. It's about survival. Long before the bright lights of Hollywood, there was a little girl growing up in the quiet town of Bedford, New Hampshire. A girl who never quite fit in. Sarah Silverman was born in December 1970, into a Jewish family that was warm but fractured. Her father, Donald, owned a clothing store and later a comedy club. Her mother, Beth Ann, was a writer and theater director who nurtured creativity but struggled to keep the family together. When Sarah was just a child, her parents divorced. The laughter at home faded into awkward silences and visits back and forth between houses. She was the youngest of 5 children, sensitive, restless, and already carrying more sadness than she could understand. By the age of 13, Sarah fell into a deep depression. She often described it as a grayness that settled over everything. She began taking medication that numbed her emotions but never truly healed the pain. At school, she was the odd one out, the funny girl who used jokes as armor. When others teased her, she'd laugh first before they could. Her sisters remember her staying up late, writing little sketches, making everyone laugh at the dinner table just to feel the room light up again. Laughter became her language, a way to connect, to fill the silence that sadness left behind. But in that laughter, there was already a seed of rebellion. Sarah learned early that humor could both protect and provoke. And in the small corners of New Hampshire, a future rebel comic was forming, one who would one day use her pain to challenge the world itself. When Sarah Silverman left New Hampshire for New York City, she was chasing a dream that felt as unpredictable as the city itself. She was 19, armed with nothing but a notebook full of jokes and a heart that refused to give up. She spent her nights performing at smoky comedy clubs, her nervous laughter echoing through half-empty rooms. The pay was terrible, the rejection constant, but Sarah didn't care. She found something intoxicating about standing in front of strangers, turning her insecurities into punchlines, her shame into stories. Then, in 1993, the dream came true, or so she thought. Saturday Night Live offered her a spot as a featured player. For a young comedian, it was like being knighted into the kingdom of comedy. But after only one season, she was quietly let go. None of her sketches made it to air. No one laughed. No one remembered her. It could have been the end. But instead of breaking her, it became her awakening. Sarah realized that she didn't belong in someone else's version of funny. She needed to create her own. She began performing her own brand of stand-up, unapologetically dark, brutally honest and disarmingly charming. She joked about things people weren't supposed to joke about, religion, sex, racism, death, and did it with a smile that made audiences question their own discomfort. Clubs began filling up. Her name started to circulate among comics who admired her audacity. "She's saying the things we're all too afraid to say," one performer whispered backstage. Sarah had finally found her voice, sharp, fearless, and unfiltered. It wasn't the fame she wanted yet, but it was the beginning of something far more important: her freedom. By the early 2000s, Sarah Silverman was no longer just another face in New York's comedy clubs. She was a force of nature. Her sharp, fearless humor was unlike anything audiences had seen before. She didn't ask for permission to offend. She asked for honesty. Then came the performance that changed everything. Jesus is Magic, 2005. A mix of stand-up, music, and unapologetic satire, it was part confession, part cultural provocation. Sarah joked about religion, politics, and human hypocrisy with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who had already been burned once and didn't care anymore. It was outrageous, it was uncomfortable, and it was brilliant. Critics called her the boldest voice in comedy. Others called her dangerous. But to Sarah, that controversy was proof she was doing something right. She wasn't just telling jokes. She was holding up a mirror to America's contradictions. 2 years later, the Sarah Silverman program premiered on Comedy Central. It was absurd, hilarious, and uniquely her. The character she played, a self-absorbed, clueless version of herself, allowed her to tackle taboo subjects like racism and sexism with biting irony. The show became a cult hit. Viewers either loved her or loathed her, but no one could ignore her. Sarah had finally conquered the comedy world on her own terms. She won an Emmy, sold out theaters, and became a fixture on late-night television. But behind the laughter, she often felt a strange emptiness. The spotlight that once felt warm now burned. The same industry that celebrated her one day could crucify her the next. Yet every time she stepped on stage, she transformed that pain into art. Her comedy wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to challenge, to disturb, to make people think. And whether the audience laughed or gasped, Sarah Silverman was finally exactly where she belonged, standing at the edge of truth, laughing into the void. At the height of her fame, Sarah Silverman had what every comedian dreams of: sold-out shows, critical acclaim, and a loyal fan base that saw her as a fearless truth-teller. But the higher she climbed, the sharper the fall became. Her dark humor, once celebrated as groundbreaking, began to draw heavy fire. Jokes from old stand-up routines resurfaced on social media, stripped of their context and empathy. Some called her a genius, others a provocateur without conscience. Headlines labeled her offensive, insensitive, a relic of a crueler time. Sarah wasn't just being criticized, she was being dissected. Every joke, every word, every silence was put under a microscope. And for someone whose art came from honesty, the scrutiny felt like suffocation. Then came heartbreak. Her long-term relationship with Jimmy Kimmel, a fellow comedian and late-night host, ended publicly. The split was amicable, but for Sarah, it deepened the loneliness she'd carried since childhood. She once admitted in an interview, "People think comedians are happy because we make them laugh. But most of us are just trying not to cry." Depression returned, darker than before. She began to question everything: her voice, her purpose, her place in a world that once cheered for her rebellion and now condemned it. But even in the silence that followed the laughter, Sarah refused to vanish. She stepped back, not out. She began to reflect on what it meant to be both a comedian and a human being. Flawed, evolving, unfinished. Her downfall wasn't a scandal. It was something more human, a reckoning. And from that reckoning, something new was about to rise. Out of the ashes of controversy, Sarah Silverman found herself standing at a crossroads. She could either chase the approval that had once defined her, or rediscover the reason she ever picked up a microphone in the first place. For the first time, she stopped trying to be shocking. Instead, she started trying to be honest. Her humor softened, not because she lost her edge, but because she'd found her heart again. In 2012, she lent her voice to Wreck-It Ralph, playing Vanellope, a glitchy, flawed, but resilient character who just wanted to belong. It wasn't just a role, it was a mirror. Audiences fell in love with the energy and vulnerability she brought. The same woman who once pushed boundaries with sarcasm was now teaching children, and herself, that imperfection could be beautiful. Behind the scenes, she began using her platform to speak out on mental health, equality, and forgiveness. Her podcast, The Sarah Silverman Podcast, launched in 2020, became a safe space, not for controversy, but for empathy. There, she listened more than she joked. She spoke openly about her depression, her regrets, and her belief that people can grow beyond their worst mistakes. Fans noticed the change. Critics did too. She wasn't just the queen of dark comedy anymore. She had become a voice of reflection, of evolution, of second chances. Sarah Silverman had always used laughter to survive, but now she used it to heal. Her redemption didn't come from erasing her past. It came from embracing it, with all its messy, complicated truths. And for the first time in her life, the laughter didn't feel like armor. It felt like peace. By the time Sarah Silverman entered her 50s, her name had already become more than a headline. It was a symbol of the comedian who dared to cross lines, fall hard, and still find her way back with grace. Her influence rippled through a new generation of performers. Amy Schumer, Ali Wong, Whitney Cummings, and countless others who credit Sarah for making it possible to be both funny and fearless. Before her, female comedians were often told to be likable. Sarah taught them they didn't have to be. They just had to be real. In comedy circles, she became known as the dark therapist, the one who turned discomfort into understanding. Her work showed that comedy doesn't always have to comfort. Sometimes it has to challenge. It can punch upward, question power, and still leave room for compassion. Even her critics began to see her differently. Over time, they recognized the purpose behind the provocation, the way she used shock not to divide, but to reveal the absurdity of prejudice and hypocrisy. Sarah Silverman didn't just change what comedians could say. She changed why they said it. She proved that humor could be both weapon and medicine, depending on how you hold it. And for every woman who ever felt too bold, too strange, or too honest to belong, Sarah's legacy whispers, "Be brave enough to laugh in the face of what hurts you." As the applause grew quieter and the spotlight softened, Sarah Silverman began to see her life differently. For decades, she'd defined herself by laughter, by how loud it was, by how long it lasted. But somewhere along the way, she realized the most meaningful moments weren't on stage. They were in the quiet, in forgiveness, connection, and self-acceptance. Through therapy and years of introspection, she learned to confront the sadness that once fueled her comedy. She stopped hiding behind the punchlines. "I used to think my pain was my enemy," she once said, "but it was actually my teacher." Sarah rebuilt her relationships with her family, her friends, even her ex-boyfriend Jimmy Kimmel, whom she now calls a dear friend for life. She found love again, this time not in chaos, but in calm. She also began using her voice to advocate for compassion in a polarized world, not by preaching, but by listening. Her podcast became a weekly meditation on empathy, forgiveness, and the messy, beautiful contradictions of being human. The woman who once thrived on provocation had learned the quiet power of kindness. She no longer needed to shock people to be seen. She simply needed to be present. "I'm softer now," she said. "Not weaker, just more human." And maybe that's the truest kind of strength. Learning that growth isn't about escaping who you were. It's about embracing who you've become. The lights dim once more. Sarah Silverman walks onto the stage. Not the ambitious 20-year-old chasing validation, but a woman who's lived, fallen, healed, and grown. The audience erupts in laughter as she begins her set. Her timing still razor-sharp, her honesty sharper. But this time, the laughter feels different. Softer, kinder. It's no longer armor. It's communion. A shared understanding that we all carry darkness, and that humor is one of the few ways we survive it. Sarah looks out at the crowd. Hundreds of strangers who've come to laugh, to forget, to feel less alone. And smiles, not to hide pain, but to honor it. Because she knows now that the purpose of comedy isn't to escape the truth. It's to face it, and still find a reason to laugh. Her journey, from the girl battling depression in Hampshire to the woman redefining honesty in Hollywood, is proof that humor can heal what the world breaks. As the curtain falls, her voice echoes, "Laughter doesn't erase pain. It just makes it a little easier to bear." And in that moment, the woman who once turned pain into punchlines has done something even greater. She's turned laughter into light.